Mustang is 5th. Best lap is a 2:16.800. The qualification session is at RT Bathurst. Jason Short from New Zealand is first on mediums. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is third on mediums. Dave B. Racing from South Africa is P2 on supers. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is fourth on supers. Dave B. Racing is second. Jason Short is first. The Race Dictator is third. Jason Short from New Zealand is P1. Ten minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short improved his P1 with a 2:07.699. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 2:06.806. That Canadian guy is P4. That Canadian guy improved his P5 with a 2:10.002. 3.196 off pole. Jason Short is third up 0.18 on mediums. Wiremu is provisional pole with a 2:05.245. Jason Short improved his P2 with a 2:05.961. 0.716 off pole. That Canadian guy from Canada is P6 on supers. That Canadian guy improved his fifth with a 2:07.323. 2.078 off pole. Dave B Racing is P4 on supers. The race dictator is third up 0.34 on supers. Toddy Mustang is sixth up 0.20. Five minutes remaining in the session. Toddy Mustang improved his fifth with a 2:07.254. 2.009 off pole. Dave B Racing is fifth. Best lap is a 2:07.040. 1.795 off pole. Dave B Racing improved his second with a 2:05.933. 0.688 off pole. Toddy Mustang is P6. The race dictator is fourth up 0.37. Dave B Racing is P2 up 0.37. Wiremew is P1 up 0.27 on mediums. The race dictator is P4 up 0.24. Toddy Mustang is 6th up 0.12. Wiremew is provisional pole with a 205.177. Wiremew is P1. Best lap is a 205.177. Dave B Racing is P2. Best lap is a 205.933. 0.756 off pole. That Canadian guy is 5th on supers. Best lap is a 207.025. 1.848 off pole. Dave B Racing is 2nd. That Canadian guy is 5th. Jason Short is 3rd up 0.11. The qualifying session is now in overtime. That Canadian guy is P5 on supers. Jason Short from New Zealand is 3rd. Best lap is a 205.961. 0.784 off pole. The race dictator is 4th. Best lap is a 2:06.241. 1.064 off pole. Broadcast bot is P20. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Wiremu is P1. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P2 on Supers. Race start. Dave B Racing is now P1. Dave B Racing lost first to Jason Short. The race dictator from New Zealand is P3 on Supers. Dave B Racing is P2. The race dictator is P3. The race dictator passed Dave B Racing for second. Dave B Racing is third. Wiremu is P4 on mediums. Dave B Racing is P3. The race dictator is third. Wiremu is third, 0.3 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremu lost third to that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.1 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu is third, 0.1 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P4, 0.2 behind Wiremu. Wiremu is third, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is fourth, 0.3 behind Wiremu. Wiremu is third, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing from South Africa is 5th, 0.1 behind the race dictator. "20 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy from Canada on lap 2 is 3rd on mediums, 0.3 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P5, 0.8 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is P3 on mediums, 0.6 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing is P5. Best lap is a 2:12.581. 5.291 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 0.9 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing is 5th, 0.7 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 2.4 behind Wiremew. Wiremew was 1.1 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is P5, 0.6 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 2.3 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing is 5th, 0.3 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 1.9 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing on lap 4 is 5th, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Wiremew is P2, 2.5 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Wiremew is 2nd. Best lap is a 2:05.585. Dave B Racing from South Africa is 5th, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Wiremew is 2nd, 1.4 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5, 0.6 behind the race dictator. "15 minutes remaining in the session. Wiremew is second on mediums, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Wiremew on lap 5 is second, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5. Best lap is a 2:06.147. 0.562 off the fastest lap. Wiremew is second, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5, 1.9 behind the race dictator. Wiremew on lap 6 is P2, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P4, 2.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Wiremew is second, 0.6 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is P4, 1.5 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is now third. Wiremew is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Wiremew was 0.6 faster last lap. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is P6 on mediums, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremew is second, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is third, 0.4 behind Wiremew. Wiremew is P2 on mediums, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. The race dictator passed Wiremew for second. Wiremew is third, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wiremew was 3.8 faster last lap. The race dictator is P2, 0.3 ahead of Wiremew. Toddy Mustang is P6, 0.9 behind Wiremew. Toddy Mustang was 9.8 faster last lap. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Wiremew exiting pits on mediums. That Canadian guy exiting pits on mediums. Dave B Racing exiting pits on supers. The race dictator is P2. Toddy Mustang exiting pits on mediums. Dave B Racing is P5, 3.1 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing from South Africa is 5th, 3.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P2, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The race dictator passed Jason Short for first. The race dictator lost P1 to Jason Short. Toddy Mustang is P5. That Canadian guy is P6. The race dictator exiting pits on supers. Dave B Racing is 4th. Toddy Mustang on lap 8 is P5. Dave B Racing is P4, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Toddy Mustang is P5. Dave B Racing is 4th, 0.2 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy on lap 8 is 6th. Dave B Racing is 4th, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Toddy Mustang is P5. Best lap is a 2:07.105. 1.840 off the fastest lap. Dave B Racing is P4, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing was 21.8 faster last lap. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Toddy Mustang is 5th. Dave B Racing is 4th on Supers, 0.8 behind the Race Dictator. Toddy Mustang is 5th. Dave B Racing is P4. Toddy Mustang is 5th, 3.3 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P4, 2.8 ahead of Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is P5, 3.4 behind Dave B Racing. Toddy Mustang was 3.9 faster last lap. Wiremew is P2, 0.8 behind Jason Short. Wiremew was 1.8 faster last lap. Toddy Mustang is 5th, 3.7 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing on lap 10 is P4, 3.4 behind the Race Dictator. Toddy Mustang is 5th, 3.6 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short exiting pits on mediums. Dave B Racing is 4th, 3.3 behind the Race Dictator. Jason Short from New Zealand is P2 on mediums, 4.0 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing is 4th on Supers, 3.6 behind the Race Dictator. Jason Short is P2, 3.4 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing is P4, 3.7 behind the Race Dictator. leader has just finished the race. Wiremu finished P1. Jason Short finished second. The Race Dictator finished P3. Dave B Racing finished P4. Toddy Mustang finished P5. That Canadian guy finished P6. Broadcast bot is 7th. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is P1 on mediums. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3 on supers. Race start. Dave B Racing is now P2. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is third on supers. Dave B Racing is P2. The Race Dictator is third. Dave B Racing is P2. The Race Dictator is third. Jason Short from New Zealand is P4 on mediums. Jason Short passed the Race Dictator for P3. The Race Dictator is 5th. The Race Dictator lost 5th to Wiremu. Dave B Racing on lap 1 is P2, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is second, 0.1 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short exiting pits on mediums. Wiremu is 4th on mediums, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. Toddy Mustang on lap 2 is 2nd, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremu is 4th, 0.3 ahead of the race dictator. Toddy Mustang is P2, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremu is P4, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu is now 4th. Toddy Mustang is P2, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. "20 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is P3, 0.6 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is 2nd, 0.3 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is 3rd, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is 2nd, 0.4 ahead of the race dictator. Wiremu exiting pits on mediums. The race dictator from New Zealand is 3rd, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang from New Zealand is P2, 0.3 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 0.6 behind Toddy Mustang. The race dictator was 5.3 faster last lap. Toddy Mustang is 2nd, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator is P3 on supers, 0.3 behind Toddy Mustang. The race dictator passed Toddy Mustang for P2. Toddy Mustang is 3rd, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Toddy Mustang lost 4th to that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy from Canada is 4th on mediums, 0.8 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is P3, 1.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P4, 1.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is P3, 1.0 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy from Canada is P4, 1.7 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is 4th, 1.0 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is 3rd. Best lap is a 2:09.057. 2.537 off the fastest lap. The race dictator is P4, 1.0 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator was 1.3 faster last lap. 15 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 2.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator exiting pits on supers. Jason Short is 2nd on mediums, 2.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy from Canada is 3rd, 3.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short on lap 5 is P2, 3.1 ahead of that Canadian guy. The race dictator is 6th. Best lap is a 2:07.724. 1.398 off the fastest lap. Jason Short from New Zealand is P2, 2.3 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator is 6th, 2.4 behind Toddy Mustang. That Canadian guy exiting pits on mediums. Jason Short is 2nd, 2.1 behind Dave B Racing. Toddy Mustang is 5th, 2.1 behind that Canadian guy. Toddy Mustang was 0.7 faster last lap. Jason Short is 2nd, 2.0 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short passed Dave B Racing for 1st. Toddy Mustang is P5, 1.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator on lap 6 is P6, 2.7 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang on lap 6 is 5th, 1.7 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P6, 2.4 behind Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing exiting pits on Supers. The race dictator is now P5. Dave B Racing is P6, 0.7 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 5.3 faster last lap. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Toddy Mustang on lap 7 is 4th, 1.6 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is P6, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Toddy Mustang is 4th, 1.3 behind that Canadian guy. Toddy Mustang was 15.2 faster last lap. The race dictator is P5, 1.2 behind Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is P4, 1.4 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand is 4th, 2.1 ahead of Toddy Mustang. Dave B Racing is P5, 3.0 behind the race dictator. Toddy Mustang exiting pits on mediums. The race dictator is 4th, 1.7 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is 5th, 3.3 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 24.1 faster last lap. The race dictator is 4th, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is 5th, 3.4 behind the race dictator. race dictator is P4, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator was 1.7 faster last lap. Dave B racing on lap 9 is 5th, 3.1 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is 4th, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremew is P2, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Wiremew was 1.2 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is 3rd. Best lap is a 2:07.736. 2.179 off the fastest lap. Wiremew is 2nd, 0.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. 5 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.5 behind Wiremew. The race dictator is P4, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremew is 2nd. Best lap is a 2:05.557. That Canadian guy on lap 9 is P3, 0.2 behind Wiremew. Wiremew is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3. Wiremew is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. Wiremew is P2, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Wiremew was 5.0 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is 3rd. Wiremew is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 0.5 ahead of Dave B Racing. Wiremew is P2, 0.4 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3, 0.2 behind Wiremew. Wiremew on lap 10 is second, 0.1 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.1 behind Wiremew. Wiremew is second, battling Dave B Racing. Wiremew lost second to Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is second on Supers, 0.1 ahead of Wiremew. Dave B Racing lost P2 to Wiremew. Wiremew is second, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is third, 0.2 behind Wiremew. Dave B Racing lost P4 to Toddy Mustang. Toddy Mustang is P6, battling Dave B Racing. Toddy Mustang passed Dave B Racing for P5. Wiremew is P2, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished first. Wiremew finished second. Dave B Racing finished third. The race dictator finished fourth. That Canadian guy finished P5. Toddy Mustang finished P6.